I started doing snap lines, is what I call, where I take a piece of twine and I dip it into liquid, either ink or liquid acrylic paint, and then fasten one side of the twine to the table and pull it across the painting, which is lying flat. And I pull it taut like a guitar string, and then I snap it against the canvas or paper or whatever, and it does this overspray, kind of like an explosion, where it hits the surface. So each snap line is this process done over time. I particularly like this mark because it kind of expresses a violence in the way it hits the support, but it makes the overspray makes it kind of look really soft and appealing. So I like that contrast between the soft look and the kind of aggressive, violent action that it took to make. I've been making versions of a snap line since I was in graduate school, when I started using a chalk line, which construction crews use, and it's like a little box that has chalk in it and it has twine in it, and they pull it out to make snap lines on the floor, for example, to make sure tiles are straight, things like that. And the problem with that is the chalk disappears. I tried fixing it and stuff, but I was doing grids and I used the chalk lines to do grids. But I would say somewhere around 2003 or thereabouts, I started using the liquid medium and putting snap lines on my paintings in various ways. As Hannah mentioned, I had a solo show in 2003 at OK Harris in New York City. And I took a train from New Mexico to New York. It was great fun. And while I was there, I went around to all the galleries, as one would, and museums, and was just so inspired. I came back and I decided I wanted to try in both my painting and drawings to really kind of focus on this process and see where it would take me as more subject matter and less as background. So this piece here, I forget the date exactly, but around 2004 or 5, it's called The Big One. And it's 60 inches wide. That's 5 feet wide by 20 inches tall, maybe. And it was done with a rope. I dipped a rope into Sumi ink and got it all saturated and then pulled it tight. And what I found this to be a really pleasing image on the paper. There's something about when you have a high quality piece of white paper and black ink, the space starts to feel infinite. And I just really like the way this was horizon line, but object at the same time. And so it led me into an exploration of just these lines on paper. I tried this on canvas and painting grounds and this and that, and somehow it was less satisfying than on paper and in ink, because the space was less finite or infinite. It was more finite on the canvas, maybe because it had hard edges. I don't know. Anyway, so I pursued this on paper. This is a piece where I did millions, well, not millions, I didn't count them, a lot of little short snap lines of varying tonalities of ink. And I started using some watercolor or colored inks along with it. This piece was in a show at the Albuquerque Museum, its biennial show in 2006, and it won Best Work on Paper. Here's another version of this. I think it's called Spectral Shift, where I go from cool to warm to cool. These are just examples. I did all kinds of variations, longer lines, shorter lines, different colors. But eventually I started, I'm sorry for the quality of this too, it's a little fuzzy, started including landscape elements in with the snapline, because some of those snap lines when they were vertical were seeming to reference landscape anyway. So this is called Tree Line 2nd Street, and it's 2nd Street in Albuquerque. One of the things about living in New Mexico, it's a desert, and people irrigate in order to grow anything there. They have these, they're called acequias, and they're man-made like ditches that water the fields, that carry drinking water from springs to people. And so if you look out across the horizon, you will see like tree lines that happen along the edges of these ditches, because that's where the water is. And so the tree lines are actually indication of human presence in the desert. And I kind of liked that. This is a detail. And you can see I was doing snap lines for the vertical as well as the horizontal. The horizontals kind of represented tufts of grass to me as well. Here's another tree line in the snow here. Yes, New Mexico gets snow. So some of these are fairly representational. I was just testing out different techniques. These are all really big. You know, if you see a horizontal one, it's usually 60-inch sheet of paper. This is Tree Line Highway 313. I was working at a museum at the time, and I would take the back road home. And this Highway 313 had lots of kind of layered tree lines next to the highway, and I would stop and take pictures. This is another tree line, Highway 313. I liked trying to create this sense of space. At about the same time, New Mexico has a really good public art program in a variety of different ways. And the Bernalillo County, which is the county that houses Albuquerque, Bernalillo County has an open space program. And what they did was they opened some private lands to artists to go onto the private lands and respond to those areas and make works of art for the open space project. And so they chose me to do this. And this is one of them, Tree Line Pajarito, which means little dove. And it was a place that I went and did a tree line. And this one is Durand 8, which is my favorite of those open space pieces. And it's just a gnarly old tree in the middle of a field. That belongs to the collection. I think it's the City of Albuquerque Public Art Collection now. Also, about this time, this is a little bit later, we're probably getting into like 2007-ish. My work in painting is becoming much more social justice oriented. This piece is called American Patriot. It's a guy drinking beer, listening to music, and carrying a big stick. I'm just testing out some of my techniques to see if I'm interested in going figurative in my drawing. Also about this time, a character appeared in my work called Ladderman. And this is Ladderman contemplating a covert climb. But Ladderman is kind of the everyman worker who discovers that he wants to advance in life. And one day he is carrying the ladder and he realizes that he can't climb while he is carrying the ladder. And that seemed to represent to me some of the problems of why there wasn't advancement of workers in the United States, is that we were doing all the work building the ladders and carrying them, and so we couldn't climb. Anyway, this is Ladderman contemplating a covert climb in his hoodie. This is Ladderman dreaming of a climb. And I did a lot of different things that Ladderman would do. These are just a couple of them. Also, here's see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. And then in 2009, I was hired as an assistant professor at Wayne State. So I moved myself and my household to Detroit from New Mexico. And I don't know if you've been to Detroit, but Detroit is full. I mean, particularly in 2009, that was a while ago, it was really full of all these bones of houses that had been abandoned. There was a huge exodus of people from Detroit to the suburbs where there was more affluence, and they left mostly poor people of color in the city itself. They call it the donut hole. And Wayne State is in the city of Detroit. And my husband and I made the choice to not live in the suburbs, but to live in Detroit. And we found a big old brick warehouse from 1903 that had been partially restored and would be a perfect studio. So for almost, it was so cheap you couldn't believe it because it's in the ghetto, but we bought it. And so we live in this neighborhood where if you look all around, there's maybe one building that has a neighbor and the rest were all just, you know, relics of what used to be a neighborhood. And we were really horrified when we first moved here. I had never seen the devastation that had happened to the Rust Belt. And here I was living in it and driving past these relics every day on my way to work. And yet, even though they were relics, there was something incredibly gorgeous about about them and poignant because of the American dream that had been destroyed. So in order to cope, I think, with my situation, I began to draw what was around me in my neighborhood. And I'm sure that I'm translating what's really awful and trying to make something beautiful out of it in order to survive. I'm sure that's what I was doing. One of my colleagues, she's now retired, Dora Appel, A-P-E-L, wrote a book about why artists are drawn to these ruins. Like photographers, it's a whole thing called ruin porn, because photographers take pictures inside some of these abandoned buildings and again, make them into this kind of decadent, lush object photograph usually. I don't think I was doing ruin porn exactly. I think I was trying to just cope with my environment. So these are all huge. And yet, even though they're huge, they're like this one is 32 by 40 about, and this one's about 40 by 50. There's something intimate, even though there's a really big scale to them. This is West 24th Street. It's about 36 by 36. I love the way the ceiling just fell into the basement. I often titled them Bones. This is Bones number 3. It's just a different view of that first house. I really enjoyed drawing all the slats that had been exposed. There are millions, or there were millions of these little tiny bungalow houses with sort of tires and junk out front. And usually there's curtains that are still hanging from the window and blowing in the wind. And it's so poignant. And this little house represents like so many places that I saw in Detroit. After I'd been drawing these in Detroit for a while, my husband and I drove back to New Mexico, probably around, I don't know, 2012 maybe. I had a sabbatical, and I went there and did some work with Tamarind Institute. It's a printmaking, a lithography place in Albuquerque. But on the way there, I hadn't noticed until I had lived in Detroit how many abandoned buildings there were along Route 66, which is the way I drive from Detroit to New Mexico, is along the old Route 66. So we took our time getting to New Mexico and stopped, and I took pictures of abandoned gas stations. Here's a self-serve. And abandoned towns. This is grocery store in Las Peñas. Las Peñas is a whole abandoned town on the border of Texas and New Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. And so we drove around Las Peñas. This is the grocery store. And I took photographs of all the abandoned buildings there and did images. This is another, this is Blue gas station, someplace along Route 66. And to me, it reminds me sort of Ed Ruscha's like gas stations, if you know who he is. And if you don't, look him up. And yet mine have this poignant sadness, I think, whereas his have a nostalgia, but not quite the same. And then I came back to Detroit and did more images. This is Michigan Avenue. And this is, I started doing smaller ones too. I had been working so big, I thought, well, I need to change scale a little bit. So I started doing smaller, even more intimate places. This was right around the corner from us. It was called the Paris Hotel, and it had been intact and abandoned. And then one day it burned. And that is the story of what happens here all the time. You'll drive by these abandoned places, and then all of a sudden the next time you drive by, you go, oh, wow, that burned down last night. Wow, that's so weird. And then then they fall in even more. And eventually we fortunately have a mayor that is now spending some money to tear them down, which is a good thing. But anyway, this is called the Paris Hotel. And this is another 2-story building. What I liked about this one is how it gradated, and I love seeing through these buildings. I like the openness to the sky that goes beyond too. This was right directly kitty corner to this building I'm sitting in now, and this building is still there. However, all the graffiti has been painted over. There was an ordinance that happened a few years ago that trying to get rid of a lot of this graffiti. And I got rid of some of it. And this is called the Variety Store because it was spelled V-A-R-I-T-Y, not variety. And then I drove by this one. This one I named for the letters and numbers on the side of the building. It's VHWH123. But there was this little doll here in the upper window that sat there that caught my eye. Plus, I like the color of this particular building. In the winter, it's Detroit, because there's not much sun, is really a study in contrast. It can be just white and dark for long periods of time. So I really liked trying to capture how the white snow and the white sky and the white everything kind of blended together. Here's another one called Used Tires. And this happens a lot too. The front porch just goes into the basement. And then there's summer. Summer compared to winter in Detroit is just the polar opposite. I mean, it's very lush. It's like a jungle. It's probably like North Carolina. I'm amazed that after it being like 17 degrees for a month, the plant life can come back here with a vengeance and just take over everything as lush as possible. However, you still end up seeing where there were buildings and where there were graffiti mixed in with the landscape. So I kind of like that. Here you have falling down houses mixed in with these fields full of flowers and fruit trees, and it's just a fun way of drawing. So I was enjoying drawing the lush flowers and stuff here. And all these like burnt out, horrible things that are so depressing in the winter start being covered up by ivy and plant life, and they almost feel cheery in the summertime. And now we get to, okay, now we're up to, I would say 2019, 2020, right when the pandemic starts. The last show I did right before the pandemic started was in Valdosta, Georgia. So I had traveled down there and had taken pictures along the way. And as the pandemic closed down, I decided I wanted to do images of fences. I felt like I was being fenced in and fenced away from other people. And even though I still did some traveling during the pandemic, it was always with barriers. So I did some studies, like here's a guardrail, an emergency guardrail. I like this piece. It's 30 maybe inches wide. I did some studies of barbed wire, thinking about fencing. I went to the barbed wire museum, and that's pretty interesting, but it didn't help me with my imagery much. But it was fun to go to. It's in Kansas, someplace. And so then I started working on these pictures I had taken from Georgia. I was stuck in my studio and thinking about guardrails and fences. And I started doing these large images of that drive to and from Valdosta several times. So here's the guardrail and the highway, and trees. This is a close-up of that particular image. And here's another one. That's the wet Georgia highway with a billboard and a guardrail. This is a detail, sort of a close-up of the image. This is Georgia highway with a field. And I loved that green line and a guardrail. Everybody, the guardrail really meant that we all had to stay in our own lane. To me, that's what that guardrail is about during the pandemic. Again, here, that's just a detail of the field. And here's the piece that's in the show right now that you guys have seen in person. It's the Georgia Highway with a billboard on a hill. And that's where I am today. I haven't been doing any drawings for maybe, I don't know, 9 months or so, because I started focusing on my painting again. What happened was during the pandemic, I was trying to teach figure painting online, and I would be alone at like 8 o'clock at night in the fine arts building on the 3rd floor, alone with my model posing, and I would be trying to stream my model to my students at home. And I would set up all these things, and I don't know, I just decided I would start painting each of these setups along with my students at home. So for about 9 months, I did paintings of the same thing that my students were painting. And that was, and then I was putting all the symbols, and just like we have here on the computer screen, everything that you see on the computer screen, I would add to the paintings, so that there's this mashup of what I set up in the studio, usually then an art historical reference, and then some interesting hieroglyphic stuff that we see on our screens all the time now. That's kind of like what Egyptians put all around their paintings. You know, you'll see an Egyptian sitting in a chair, and then there's all these hieroglyphs that they knew what it was, just like we know what these symbols are on our screen. But you know, 2,000 years from now, who knows what these little boxes and arrows and, you know, things are that we're looking at and sort of ignore all the time now. So that's what I've been doing instead of doing works on paper. And that's the end of my presentation. Do you